We tend to look back on the American Revolution and think the outcome was, well, inevitable. But that's not how it felt at the time. In fact, in the winter of 1776, the whole revolution was hanging by a thread, just about ready to be snuffed out before it ever really began. I mean, just look at the matchup. It was completely lopsided. The British sent over this absolute juggernaut, the biggest, baddest army they'd ever assembled for an overseas campaign. And what did the Americans have? A ragtag group of guys who were undertrained, barely had any supplies, and were getting absolutely ravaged by disease. We're talking 1 in every 4 soldiers was too sick to even stand, let alone fight. It was a disaster waiting to happen. And that mismatch on paper, it turned into an absolute nightmare on the battlefield. It wasn't just one bad day. It was a relentless, soul-crushing cascade of defeats that played out over just a few short months. The first huge blow landed at the Battle of Long Island. Washington was worried the British were trying to trick him, so he kept half his army back to defend Manhattan. That hesitation, that indecision, was fatal. The British found a little-known pass, swung their army completely around the American lines, and just trapped them. It was a brilliant move by them and an absolute catastrophe for the Americans. And Washington? He had to watch it all happen from a distance. He saw some of his best soldiers, the men of the 1st Maryland Regiment, get absolutely cut to pieces in a last-ditch effort to save the army. You can just feel the agony in his words right here. After that, things just completely fell apart. Boom, Long Island in August. Next, New York City falls in September. Then, another loss at White Plains in October. And the final nail in the coffin, the absolute disaster at Fort Washington in November, where almost 3,000 men were just gone. It was a constant drumbeat of defeat. So it's no surprise that people started losing faith in Washington's leadership. But this is brutal. This wasn't some random soldier complaining. This was his own second-in-command, General Charles Lee. The revolution wasn't just losing on the battlefield, it was starting to crack from the inside out. And all of this leads to what is, without a doubt, the absolute lowest point of the entire war. This desperate, freezing retreat across New Jersey with the British Army nipping at their heels. Let's go back to Fort Washington for a second, because the scale of that loss was just mind-boggling. Washington had waffled on whether to order a retreat and left the decision to a subordinate. The result? 2,800 men, a massive chunk of his army, either killed or captured in one fell swoop. It was a colossal blunder. But the army wasn't just getting beaten, it was literally dissolving. On December 1st, the enlistments were up for thousands of soldiers. And you know what they did? 2,000 of them just walked away. They'd had enough. Morale wasn't low, it was gone. And this feeling of hopelessness, it started to infect everyone. When civilians in New Jersey saw the Continental Army running for its life, they figured the cause was lost. So thousands of them lined up to take a pardon from the British, swearing a new oath of loyalty to the king. The revolution was failing on the home front, too. Man, you can just feel the bitterness and despair in this quote from Congressman Robert Morris. He's saying that the very same people who'd been shouting the loudest for independence were now cowering and begging for forgiveness. The cause was dying. But right then, with everything on the line, with a revolution on life support, Washington decides to risk it all on one last, utterly desperate roll of the dice. The plan he cooks up is incredibly ambitious. It's a 3-pronged surprise attack. 3 different groups of soldiers are going to cross the Delaware River at night. Washington himself will lead the main force against the Hessians at Trenton, while 2 other groups create diversions to keep the enemy off balance. Now, the conditions for this were just insane. They're crossing a river choked with giant chunks of ice, at night, in the middle of a blizzard, on Christmas. In fact, the weather was so awful that the 2 diversionary groups couldn't even get across the river. So the plan is already failing. But Washington, he decides to push on anyway, all on his own. And what happens next is nothing short of a miracle. This impossible gamble pays off, delivering 2 small but absolutely stunning victories that would change the entire direction of the war. They caught the Hessians at Trenton totally by surprise. I mean, look at these numbers. The fight was over in less than an hour. The Hessians had about 100 men killed or wounded and another 900 captured. The Americans, they had 5 guys wounded. 5. It was a breathtakingly lopsided victory. But they weren't out of the woods yet. A lot of his soldiers' enlistments were expiring again. So Washington gets in front of his exhausted, freezing men and basically pleads with them. He asks them to stay just one more month, telling them that this moment, right here, is where they can do the most good for the cause of liberty. And you know what? Almost all of them stayed. With his army's morale soaring, Washington doesn't sit still. He marches his men through the dead of night, slipping right around the main British army led by General Cornwallis, and smacks the British garrison at Princeton. It was another brilliant, audacious move and another shocking victory. So why do these two little battles matter so much? Well, they did way more than just win some ground. They completely reignited American morale and saved the army from literally falling apart. They proved that, yes, this amateur army could stand up to and beat professional European soldiers. It forced the British to retreat from most of New Jersey. And maybe most importantly, it made countries like France and Spain sit up and say, maybe these Americans have a shot after all. It all boils down to this, doesn't it? A revolution that was all but dead and buried was brought back to life in the span of just 10 chaotic, freezing days. It's just an incredible reminder of how one moment of pure audacity against all the odds can completely change the course of history.